Hello everyone, welcome to episode 18 of Talk to the Chip.
Yeah, we are back in Ormantepe again.
Back home in Ormantepe.
Who are we talking about today? Would you like to tell us, because it's in Italian?
Well, actually the title isn't in Italian. This is a piece we're going to discuss Visage.
Visage.
By Luciano Berio.
Berio.
Sì. So Italian composer Luciano Berio.
Okay, yeah. Today it is another classic in a way, because we've covered all sorts of pioneers, but we started with Stockhausen, and then now we covered Varese and now Berio. These are not to skip pioneers, I guess.
Well, Berio is important. I mean, it's important in lots of ways, but maybe his most important thing was that, how do you measure someone's importance? I mean, it was that he was involved in setting up the
Milan studio.
Yes.
Phonology studio, although I'm not going to attempt to tell the Italian version of the studio's title. The Studio di Fonologia Musicale di Radio Milano.
I perfectly understood that. So yes, very important.
I don't speak Italian, but that's what it is called.
Yeah, and he set it up with
Bruno Maderna.
Bruno Maderna.
Luciano Berio and Bruno Maderna. Basically, it was their joint initiative.
Yes.
It was established in 1955.
1955, very, very early on with
Paris Cullen Studio.
Yes, same period. And they had to have, because it was such early days, they had to have equipment especially built for it. Mm-hmm. There's a lovely YouTube clip somewhere. We'll put the link in the
Instagram one.
Of equipment from there, and lovely videos of very early days of going through the equipment in the studio with the ring modulators.
You may even learn how to say ring modulator and white noise in Italian if you watch
that video. Anello modulatore.
Anyway,
yes.
It's really, really a gold material video, I think.
Yeah.
I couldn't find any full versions of it. It's just excerpts. The pieces of equipment, some of them are now being exhibited in this musical instruments museum in Milan, in a castle.
But interestingly, it was set up in 1955, and only 6 years later, Visage was the last piece that Berio did in there before leaving. And it's interesting. Now, I've got in front of me my original copy of the electronic music on Turnabout Records, which was the first commercial release of Visage, 1967. Mm-hmm. And there is a long quote. Well, Berio wrote some text about, quite short actually, considering it's a 20-minute piece of music, which involves text. It was quite a short text he wrote about Visage. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he says at the end of this text, which might be a pointer to why he left the studio, was, the voice is that of Cathy Berberian. For me, Visage also constitutes a tribute to the radio as the most widespread disseminator of useless words.
Useless words, yeah.
Dopo ragazzi, il macino orca venite stavarmita. Starimita sirkut tast tu starama verete mado verata starop aftara vedira voda.
So you get the feeling from that he may have fallen out with the people who run the radio station.
Oh yeah, yes.
You know. What they're doing is disseminating useless words.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, the studio is still very important to mention, like, however it ended or what happened. I want to talk a bit about this. So this was the time when these early electronic music studios were basically sparkling around the world, in Europe, in Japan, in the US, although the initiatives in the US and the UK were more private. I mean, the closest example in the UK was the BBC Radiophonic Workshop.
Or Peter Zinoviev's studio, the EMS studio.
In EMS. But my point is, the two main studios were Elektronische Music in Cologne, with Stockhausen, and the GRM studio in Paris with Schaeffer and Boulez. And these two studios had a conflict. One of them, Paris studio, approaching this sort of music with pre-recorded material, Musik concrète.
The Musik concrète.
Whereas the German studio was
Elektronische Musik.
yes, purely we want to purely generate these electronically. These sounds electronically. We don't call the Paris approach electronic music. So there were these two different approaches. And in 1955, the phonology studio in Milan came up with a different approach. Without defying any of these approaches, they basically used both of the approaches and also text-based composition, basically. So in a way, it's pioneered what we call electroacoustic music today.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was a really important one. And Visage, this piece in particular, employs text-based composition, but also both of the approaches of the studios. Of course, the Paris and Cologne studios much later on decided to delve into each other's approaches, which started with especially Gesang der Jüngling, Stockhausen's phenomenal piece.
The Visage has a lot of parallels with Gesang der Jünglinge, in that it's electronic, very sophisticated electronic music background with a human voice, a single human voice in front.
And Gesang der Jüngling came out in 1956, I think.
Yeah.
So much earlier. This is 1960.
1961. And I think, but there was an earlier piece by Berio which I think is important in terms of content, from 58, Tema, Omaggio a James Joyce. So there's this idea of manipulating text, of manipulating the human voice in the way that Joyce did in Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, that appears all the way through that way of using sound, using the human voice. And that's what really sets this piece apart. And it's interesting, actually, but when you read about this piece, there isn't a lot of text, or there isn't a lot of analysis of the electronics. It focuses so much on Cathy Berberian's performance. So much of it is about the concepts in her performance, where it comes from, the theatricality of it, how does that work with electronic music. Very little text is devoted, or analysis is devoted for the music that he composed in the background. And I wanted to quote from this book, Paul Griffith's Guide to Electronic Music, Thames and Hudson, and this is 1976, I think this was written. Really, really old-fashioned bit of text. You're going to enjoy this. So, the accent is on non-verbal communication. The voice laughs, sobs, moans, gabbles in nonsense language, and only twice struggles to enunciate a comprehensible word. Parole, which is the Italian word for words. Now, this is great, this line. Thanks to the intimacy of the electronic medium, which places such works as Visage in the theatre of the mind, one has the feeling that one is observing a woman in the emotional turmoil of anguish, fear, hysteria, and sexual arousal.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Ooh. So, I mean, that's a very sort of academic way of encapsulating what is a very visceral, very human...
Even the snoring sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very human performance that's going on. There's
primitive in a way.
Yeah. And there is that, you can hear, after that moment where she says, it's only about 3 minutes in where you hear the word parole, words. And then after that, the improvisation has a kind of Italian feel to it. And then about 8 minutes in, there's this really emotive moment where the voice is completely submerged under some really brutal, aggressive noises. Almost like crumbling buildings, whatever, bombs going off. And then what comes out of it is her sobbing and weeping.
Yeah, it's so intense. When I first heard it, I was scared.
It's quite scary, isn't it? It's quite intense, that, isn't it?
Yeah, intense and scary.
And then the sobbing and the weeping becomes hysterical laughter.
Yeah.
Sort of pointing to psychotic, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
It makes me think, it just reminds me that I'd like to quote again from his text, because of the particular word that he used. Visage can be regarded as a transformation of real examples of vocal behaviour that go from unarticulated sound to syllable, from laughing to weeping and singing, from aphasia to types of inflections derived from specific languages, English and Italian as spoken on the radio, Hebrew, Neapolitan dialect, etc. Now, he mentions the word aphasia. Now, aphasia is a very specific medical term. On the NHS website, it says aphasia is when a person has difficulty with their language or speech. It's usually caused by damage to the left side of the brain, for example, after a stroke.
Not being able to speak properly.
Yeah.
Or that kind of sleep paralysis feel when you want to say something, but you are out of breath and...
Yeah. And it's funny that he's used that word because it sort of suggests... Because the thing with aphasia is that anyone suffering from aphasia is not intellectually impaired. There's no problem with intelligence or their understanding. It's just literally a physical thing that they can't control their voices properly. Weirdly enough, yesterday afternoon, after doing this bit of research, I spoke to a psychiatrist and she was talking about formal thought disorder, FTD. And this is something that is part of psychosis that people suffer from for all sorts of reasons. And formal thought disorder leads to garbled speech in the same way. And I'm just wondering whether really Berio wasn't really talking about aphasia. He was thinking more about formal thought disorder. Where someone is you can hear the desperation in Berberian's performance, that it's like it's on the edge of psychosis all the time.
Hysterical.
Yeah. And
Hysteria.
And that it's actually it's not a formal sort of a medical state. It's a psychological state, isn't it? You know. And it's quite desperate. It's not. She's not having a lot of fun, is she?
No, but apparently she was referred to as the 9th oscillator in the Milan studio. Cathy Berberian at the time was working with a number of avant-garde composers, including John Cage, who visited the studio. They had 8 oscillators. She was the 9th oscillator. So I don't know if the oscillators have a choice of having fun or not, apparently. But then that brings us to the concept of intelligibility versus unintelligibility. The more unintelligible the sounds, the more musical they are, aren't they?
Yeah.
So what's the musical aspect of this to you, Professor Podmore?
Well, for me, of course, it is an expressive thing, isn't it? But because it's a human voice, it's not truly abstract in the way that a musical gesture is. You know, a vocal gesture is always related to, you feel the physicality of the person and you immediately relate to the experience of making that sound, like sobbing and crying and weeping or hysterical laughter. You know, that there is always an emotional content. You know, even in the section where she's speaking in a kind of strange Italian. You know, there's a gentleness to it. It's almost like she's talking to a child. You know,
Oh yeah.
And you can't create that completely abstractly with musical instruments.
No.
So even if there's no intelligibility of the words, they carry no meaning as such. It's no specific. They're not symbols for concepts. You relate to you relate to the emotional impulse behind all of the sounds she's making.
But also there are really nice moments where the electronically generated sounds and her voice get blended.
Yeah.
That's where it gets even more horrifying.
Yeah, because there is that feeling towards the end of the piece that she's... it's a 20-minute long thing. It's quite an experience going through Visage.
I don't think I would play it blasted from my windows.
Well, you'd be all right round here. I mean, the good people of Ormantepe, they'd be quite happy to hear.
No, I think they will call the police to save me.
Oh, yes, of course, yes, yeah. Well, from my point of view, they might think I had some victim in here.
Yes, let's not blast it after the podcast.
Yes, but there is that feeling towards the end of it, like the last third of it, that it's. In Gesang der Junglinge, there's that feeling that the electronics and the voice are becoming
choir
more...
and also children's voice.
It's
a children's voice.
It's a child
not someone
voice. Well, it's
crying.
the child is the ex-rector of where I work.
Oh my God.
Josef Prochka.
You are a walking witness of electronic music history.
When I got to know him, he was this sort of crusty old professor.
How old is he? Or what?
Well in his 70s.
I see. So
He's
that
retired.
was in the choir of Gesang der Junglinge.
He was the one single voice, yeah.
And he worked with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen.
So he was like 10 years old then, yeah. And then he became a tenor singer, like opera singer.
Nice.
Yeah. But the relation between child's voice becoming this choir of little angels within Stockhausen's crypto-religious view to Cathy Berberian, obviously a really complex adult woman being submerged in this electronic sound world towards the end of the piece. It does have a touch of horror to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how she looked like when they were recording this in the studio. There is so much physical moment in this performance. This piece is very physical. I mean, I can already imagine picture it.
Yeah. There's strong links with, of course, I mean, we mentioned Joyce, of how language, of changing language and mixing languages together. I mean, in Finnegan's Wake, there's references to over 60 different languages. You have to know a handful of European languages to be able to just read a couple of sentences in Finnegan's Wake. So there's that Joyce thing, but there's also the kind of Kurt Schwitter's Dada thing, like Dada performances of ostensibly meaningless words. Theatre of the early 20th century, and Samuel Beckett as well. So, you can imagine it as really is a performance in line with all those things. So she would have to put a strong physicality into it.
Yeah, in Berio's own words, it's purely a radio program work, a soundtrack for a drama that has never written. That is like a soundtrack to I would call it a psychological thriller.
Well, talking of psychological thrillers, Cathy Berberian's name was borrowed for a horror film by British director Peter Strickland, Berberian Sound Studio. I think it's 2012.
Yeah.
Which is a really good film that brings together Italian horror movies and the idea of personalities moving from one body into another.
And it's based on the Phonology Studio in Milan.
Yes. Yeah. There's this sort of tradition, you imagine a tradition of nonsensical, breaking down the meaning in language from Joyce into the Dada movement, Kurt Schwitter's, then with Samuel Beckett, who was around the same time as Berio and Cathy Berberian, and then going into more pop music things with Damo Suzuki. Damo was mixing languages and freely improvising all the time and all that kind of stuff. There's even a website dedicated to his different understandings of his text. And then, of course, there was all the... I mean, it's not nonsense, it's not babble, but, you have some enormously successful and popular Jamaican records over here in the UK. I'm thinking of like Uptown Top Ranking, where nobody understood the lyrics at all because it was all in Jamaican patois. But everyone could sing along.
Yeah.
Because you get the feeling of what it means and without necessarily having the direct content. That's one of the things about human voice in music.
Yeah.
And of course, there's there was one quote from the Réseau des Arts Médiatiques.
Okay.
Which is basically the record company for a lot of this music.
All right.
And in English, it says Cathy Berberian, who by crying, laughing, heckling, or wailing creates a kind of meta piece, which can be situated between music and radio phantasmagory.
Phantasmagory.
Yeah. Thus, she unchains the singer's voice from the classical conceptions of singing. So this idea of unchaining the voice, of like freedom, then we're talking about the early 60s, then there's all the links to free jazz. And free jazz vocalizing was about unchaining.
Oh, yeah, okay, it is.
Yeah.
And also these moments of, when we talked about how all sorts of emotional states we are listening to.
Yeah.
This moment when her Berberian's voice resolves, almost, it's like a resolution into laughter.
Yeah.
They jump cuts, like voices resolving into a laughter. It's almost like that sort of free jazz. No, it's not scat singing, obviously.
Yeah, but
it's not fun, but there is that aspect.
Yeah, you can hear relation there with free jazz improvisation. There's all sorts of improvisation.
So then there is the main thing in it. It's very operatic also.
Yeah.
So that's the drama aspect of it.
Yeah.
But then there is the freestyle approach.
And I couldn't find any information anywhere about the history of the actual creation of the piece. Because I would like to know whether Berio created his electronic backing track and then she came in and improvised over it, or he brought her into the studio and she improvised and then he created the backing track. But it would be really interesting to know how they did that, or whether they did it in sections and going backwards and forwards.
His program notes don't explain that. It's more about the actual abstract meaning of the piece. His own program notes, which is on his website.
I think that's the same text that's on the back of the record as well.
Yeah, there's not much about the recording progress or the process or the creation process. All we know is it was created in 1960 and 1961.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of much more like a mainstream popular piece of music. The Great Gig in the Sky in The Dark Side of the Moon in Pink Floyd. So the way it was created was very, very spontaneous. They got a session singer. They had a drama with her later on. She just sang and it was one take, that's one of the peak moments of the Dark Side of the Moon album. But we know how that happened. And I'm wondering if that worked out like this here. However, let's bear in mind, Cathy was already involved a lot in this studio. She was a ninth oscillator. So I'm assuming there's the compositional aspect with some instructions, although they are very avant-garde, but also like chance operations. Also, having worked already at length with all the other composers at the studio, that she would know inside out what the stylistic character of her performance, what they were after. So I get the feeling that she could just walk in and just do it. Yeah, possibly. I mean, there's some text on her, which will be worth reading. Maybe there would be answers there. I have not been able to read it before this show, honestly. I'm going to read that. It's titled "The Absent Diva."
The Absent Diva.
The Notes Toward the Life of Cathy Berberian by Armand Schwartz. That tells a lot about her connections with all these composers, from David Tudor to John Cage, or to Darmstadt school or to phonology studio, I think that would be worth a read to investigate and understand the progress. But as I said earlier, none of the program notes explain it.
Yeah.
But there are, like, she also had a lot of involvement in sequenza,
Sequenza,
the
yeah.
sequences pieces by Berio again. I've found much more information about that one than this.
Did she work with Luigi Nono? Because he was from a kind of another
Yes.
background entirely. She did.
So I've just found a note about. I mean, not directly, but when they were creating Fontana Mix, Nono ignored her, and she developed a lifelong loathing for Stockhausen. Berberian had less success with the more austere members of the musical elite. Nono ignored her and she had developed a lifelong loathing for Stockhausen. That's one of the notes in the Absence Diva piece. Definitely worth a read. So definitely there was some involvement with Luigi Nono, yeah. Why did you particularly get curious about that?
Well, it's just interesting that with Luigi Nono's pieces, they rely very heavily on text. And cut-ups of text. And of course his take on it wasn't so much about deconstructing meaning, but of like finding political meaning in text. His angle was very, very different. I was just wondering whether there was a personal link there with Cathy Berberian. It doesn't seem to be. She wasn't his cup of tea.
Possibly he wasn't hers either. Right?
Yes.
So that's, for our listeners, it might have been an intense
experience with the human voice.
We should have set up a disclaimer. But they did listen to Xenakis.
Yes.
So they should be all right.
Yes, good.
Good. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Enjoy the piece.
Enjoy the piece. Bye-bye.